Hey, how you doing today? My name is Roderick Walker, and today we're going to discuss the topic of violence in video games. Are video games responsible for theft, gun violence, or even murder? Let's examine the controversy of violence in video games. I remember Christmas Day, 5 years old, when I opened my first video game system. It was a Nintendo game, and it was packaged with Duck Hunt. You know the game where you had the gun, where you shoot the ducks on the screen? I instantly fell in love with video games. I know many of you have had that nostalgic moment where you first put your hands on the controller or you played your best friend for hours of fun. Guess what? You should have never picked up the controller because it made you volatile and you can't distinguish video game from reality. Politicians and a portion of society are saying that video games have influence on violent behavior. Today, let's examine the facts and the truth about video games and effects on human behavior. Let's begin with some background on video game statistics. You know that 98% of 12 to 17-year-olds in the United States played video games in 2011, and the game industry grossed over $11.7 billion in revenue. In 2011, 10 of the top selling video games contained violent or explicit content. Sales of video games had quadrupled from 1995 to 2011, while the arrest rate for juvenile murder fell 71%, and the arrest rate for all juvenile violent crime declined 49.3% in the same period in the U.S. 67% or more than two-thirds of U.S. household individuals play video games or handheld systems. Now that we have the stat which prove that the majority of U.S. has some type of game system, let's weigh the pros and cons of the violence of video games. Video games and video game related incidents. Do you remember the shooting at Columbine High, which killed 13 people and left the country in controversy? The two teenage boys that were the shooter that were avid video game players in such games as Doom and Warstrike. The Columbine shooting linked to a conspiracy that video game caused the tragedy. The teenagers were on prescription antidepressant drug Zoloft. The boys were bullied at school and they were part of a gothic cult. The shooting occurred was contributed to a combination of factors, and some wanted to point the blame on video games. When an incident occurs, you have to look at a multitude of factors, not just to target one thing or use a scapegoat because it's the easiest way out. I have gave you an incident that was said to be related to the influence of video games, but you have to examine the factor of violence itself. Virginia Tech shooting, April 16, 2007, which killed 32 people and wounded 25. Attorney and anti-gang activist Jack Thompson blamed the tragedy on violent video game Counter-Strike. Other high-profile figures, such as television host Dr. Phil and Republican president candidate Mitt Romney, argued that video games were to blame for the shooting. It was later revealed by the Virginia Tech review panel that the shooter did not play video games. The shooter was diagnosed with severe anxiety disorder and was ordered to get treatment before the shooting. The shooter was also bullied and taunted at school and sought counseling and therapy. Now that you see that violence has many contributing factors, and playing video games does not necessarily is one of them. Today I talked to you about video games and in correlation to violence. I gave you a string example where incidents were blamed on video game content, and further examined there were many contributing factors that were in play. Video games are fun and should be enjoyed by people of all ages and gender. Video games have labels on them called ratings, which let parents know the age restriction and the type of content the game has. The responsibility is ultimately up to the parent to restrict kids from games they do not wish them to indulge in. Video games are made for entertainment purposes only and should be perceived in any other way. Thank you. And video games does not necessarily correlate to violence.